Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Today's the Day Changemakers Podcast. I am Jody Grunwald. This week, my guest is Charlene Gorzela. Charlene spent 26 years as the CEO of a successful professional staffing services firm in the city of Chicago. She left that chapter of her life and is now focused on positive and divine intelligence. She is a certified grief recovery method specialist and host of the podcast Grief Recovery Now. We discuss her journey of recovery after losing her dad and dealing with addiction early on in her life, the importance of being awake, and how her path now is being that welcoming spirit to help people on their course of reinvention. Please take a moment to subscribe to the Today's the Day Changemakers YouTube channel, stream this podcast on all streaming sites, like, comment, review, and share to help our guests be heard. Don't forget to like us on Facebook and Instagram at Today is the Day Live It. Today is the Day LLC provides many services. Please go to todayisthedayliveit.com to learn more about how we can help you and your business connect, grow, and thrive. The views expressed by all Today's the Day Changemakers podcast guests are their own. Their appearance on the Today's the Day Changemakers podcast does not imply any endorsement of them or any entity that they represent. Have a great week, everyone. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Today's the Day Changemakers podcast. I am Jody Grunwald, and I get to interview the most incredible people from around the world who are making a difference, whether it's in their corner of the world or beyond. And today I have Charlene Gorzela. Gorzela, is that right?
It's Gorzela, yes. Perfect.
Awesome. Hi, Charlene. How are you?
I'm doing awesome. Incredible. So happy to be here, especially with you.
Oh, well, I'm happy you're here, and we're turning the tides a little bit here because I was interviewed on your podcast, and now we're turning the tides and you're being interviewed on mine. So we'll talk about your podcast in a little while, but I just want to read a little bit about your bio first to give everybody a little background about you, and then we'll go into a conversation. Sound good?
Sounds awesome. Thank you.
So after 26 years as the CEO of a successful professional staffing services firm in the city of Chicago, she knew that the next chapter would be another important one for her. She has always had the passion in the human potential movement and knew that this next chapter in her life would be something unprecedented and extraordinary. What happened was something that even in her wildest dreams, she would not even have guessed that she would be doing. What she did know was it would be about the pure potentiality of the human potential spirit, the open heart, and its resilience to thrive in extraordinary ways, even in the midst of life's changes and losses. She was introduced to the grief recovery method, and while she and people close to her thought that she would get into something that was more positive in a cheerleader type of way and not the grief recovery business, her intuition and life had other plans. What Charlene discovered was what this methodology does. It gets us free to go from unresolved, incomplete grief to a powerful sense of resolve, completeness in our relationships, and sudden change in our lives to help free the griever to live the life beyond their wildest dreams. Charlene is also very active with organizations, nonprofits in either a board of directors capacity or in committees that serve the homeless in collaborative housing, substance abuse, and animal welfare. She also has a podcast called Grief Recovery Now, and that was the podcast that I was recently on. How long has your podcast been going for?
It's 2 years this month.
Oh, congratulations. Happy anniversary. That's
Thank
awesome.
you. I just saw something on Facebook pop up saying, I was saying my first podcast. I was like, oh my God, time flies while you're having fun.
Yeah, sometimes Facebook memories can be super fun like that. I love when it's a nice surprise for the day. And let's start off really quick. Just tell everybody where they could find your podcast, because I think that's always important.
Apple Podcast is my favorite, but we are on all the podcast platforms. Most of them, like Spotify and all of that. And I'm through Acast. That's who houses my podcast. But Apple's my favorite because you can subscribe, rate, and review. And then there's Spotify and just look it up. It's Charlene Gorzela. Grief Recovery Now with Charlene Gorzela.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So we hope everybody will go and find your podcast and listen, because it's great and wonderful. And Charlene is so intuitive. She takes you on a great ride as we had such a great conversation. But let's go back a little, Charlene. Where did you grow up? Where were you born?
I grew up in the inner city of Chicago. It was called the Humboldt Park area. And it was a Polish, African-American, Puerto Rican neighborhood. So it was very, very mixed. And it was crazy little neighborhood, it's gangs and all that. I mean, my family didn't have a lot of money. We lived on the second floor above an old boys store. That's what it was called. And it was, we were 7 of us, my parents and 5 kids. So we had three small bedrooms and 1 bath with an air conditioner in the living room. So that's where I grew up.
I can understand. I didn't have an air conditioner in the living room. I only had it in my bedroom. So I can totally relate to that one room that you have to stick to when it's really hot out.
Yes.
Gotcha.
And the humidity in Chicago is quite the humidity when it happens.
Oh, absolutely. That's how it felt in Brooklyn too. So I totally agree with you. Was there a pivotal moment in your childhood that you remember that kind of set you on your path? I know that your path was different, right? 26 years as CEO of a professional staffing services firm. But was there something that happened in your childhood that led you to that?
My dad died when I was 16 and he was 46. He died of a sudden heart attack. And at that time, just to let you know where I'm at today, I have 34 years of being clean and sober. So I've been sober woman for 34 years. And so during that time, I started, drinking, smoking pot and stuff with my friends and all that. And so I was 16 when my dad died. And I think looking back in retrospect, why it was such a pivotal time, and which will bring me to grief recovery. Yeah. At that time, my friends were more important. So my dad died, and I didn't have quite the relationship I would have liked to have had looking back as I got older. Probably 4 or 5 years from then, that's 16, I would have many people have had teenagers. So at that time, they're friends and other things are more important than your parents are, right?
Of course.
And so he died suddenly, and that was big. I didn't realize how much it affected me till later, until I started doing grief recovery work and how it affected and the filters I walked through. So in retrospect, it would be that. And then when I got 30, I got sober, but that's not childhood. So that was the biggie, my dad dying.
That's huge. And it was sudden. Were you super close?
Yeah, well, as I didn't have the relationship, I loved my father. And it was so weird because a few weeks before I saw him and I started crying. And I wonder if I had this intuitive sense that something was going to go on. And then we got a call one day. We grew up in Chicago. And then when I graduated 8th grade, we moved to Wisconsin in this small town of 740 people. My parents wanted to get out of the neighborhood. So we moved there. And, they didn't buy a house in Chicago. They just wanted to get out of the neighborhood.
Right.
And we knew it. We used to go there as children and all that. Little did they know it was going to be such a small town. That really affected me in childhood too. And so it limited certain things, but it probably saved my life because I was up and running at a very young age. And so what was the question?
Yeah, I know, right? I'm following you, and it's just, your story is incredible. No, so were you close to your dad? Is where we started with that.
You know what? I could have been closer because, as I said, my friends were more important. I love my dad, and I still remember his laugh. And also you have family of origin work. They're Eastern European, right? And what I know is that, they didn't talk much about their background and all that. And so did I get deep with my dad? No. And that's probably why I'm into the work I'm in today, because I do want people to get deeper within themselves, to know thyself. And so my dad had a heart. He had triplets. Oh, I'm a triplet too. So I grew, they say you're born alone and you die alone. Well, I was born into a party. And so my parents, and then I had an older brother and sister, and they didn't have a lot of money. We had the small place, 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and the triplets were in 1 room. And we had 3 bunk beds, and my sister and brother shared a room. And then my parents shared another room. And that's how we grew up. And I remember all the bills on they used to have those bill holders at the time with all the paper. And my mom was a housewife. So my dad had to take care of it all. And so
Yeah, what a transition when he was no longer here. You were how old? You were 16 when he passed away. So
Yeah.
you're
We moved a few years before because he died right before our junior year. So did I get as close to him? But no, I have memories of him, and he liked to bowl and all that kind of stuff. So did I get deep with him? No, but he was my dad. So we didn't have a bad relationship. It was just,
yeah.
it wasn't deep.
I understand that.
I wish it was deeper. I wish I had that capacity at the time.
Is that also the time when you had mentioned that about, getting into some things that you talked about, you were in recovery, always in recovery, right? Isn't that the case when you're in that space? And so with that being said, were you 16 when that all started, or was
No,
that
I was probably about 14. I smoked my first joint in 7th grade. A little Catholic girl with her little uniform, flat chested, with some friends who were a little older boys, said, here, try this. And then also I'm a yes person, like, yeah, let's go. And I said yes, Joe, because it was in front of me. And did I know I had the alcoholism, which is the ism part? I guess I did. It's in my genes, I believe. And I don't know why I was the way I was, because later on it was causing me problems. But I started 7th grade. I think you're 13, 14 at the time.
Yes. Yeah.
So I was like full blown, no, but I know that my friends were more important being out. And we had a lot of freedom in our childhood, because I think because we were triplets, my parents thought we'd take care of ourselves. Back in the day, I'm 64 years old. Go out and play, come back when it's dark. They had no idea where we were. Now people are always on text with their parents, which I had to learn a lot. But I'm glad I had those experiences I had.
Oh, absolutely. Our journeys are the way they are for a reason. During the hard times, we're really not sure why those are the reasons, but it's at the other side of it, when we see the light, then sometimes we get the hit of why we had to go through that. Did you get that when you were, at 30, when you decided it was time to get clean? Did that happen for you? That hit of why it was so important in that moment to change?
First of all, I had to have that moment of clarity. The last time I drank, and I was like drinking fun, I was a fun person, but I would black out. And then something got threatened. The relationship got threatened. So I had that moment of clarity. It was like in my consciousness, it's like the jig is up. So I ended up going to outpatient. And I won't get into the whole story of how it happened, but I go, oh my God. It was the hardest thing to do. I was afraid to drink. I was afraid not to drink. And I also used drugs too at the time, because I was a product of the 70s and 80s, right? It was 1988, February 12th, 1988. It was funny. I'll tell a story. Someone referred me to Northwestern Hospital for outpatient. And I went to a Mark Grabowski. I'd never forget his name, 34 years ago. And he said, so I talked to him like 2 hours. And he says, well, I think you need to go to outpatient here at Northwestern Hospital. And I thought he was just going to tell me, you need to go to therapy or something. And I was like, what? And during that time, the Olympics were going on in Calgary in 1988 in February, right? I said, well, I can't go. I'm going to the Olympics and all that stuff. And he said, okay, go to the Olympics and come back and go to the outpatient. It was from 6 to 9. I said, okay. So he had sort of this long office, not too long where it was a hallway, but long enough. And I remember walking to the door, taking my hand, the doorknob, opening it up. And he said, Charlene? And I go, yes. And I turned around, looked at him. And he said, you may think about drinking. Don't. All of a sudden, like a little girl, I could feel the tears coming up. I go, I'm going to act like, hopefully, I think I sounded like this. He goes, you may think about drinking. Don't. I go, okay. And I went over a week to the Olympics. They didn't have bottled water at the time. This is 1988. They didn't have like the bottled water. All they had were booze on these buses and all of that. I couldn't drink any of it. but something told me that your time was up. I was afraid to drink, as I said, afraid not to, but I had to stay the course. How I did it, I believe in higher power, divine intelligence, just kept me really safe. Something, I had a bigger yes going on than the drinking and drugs.
Yeah. And, and a little bit of a cheerleader behind you, right? With just that, I wonder what would have happened if he didn't say that. Do you think you would have?
I don't know, because I'm still talking about it today.
Right.
This little moment. So to answer your question, what insight did you have? I couldn't consciously verbalize it, but looking back, it was like, okay, that meant, this emotion that came up. I didn't go falling apart or whatever, but something said, okay. And I kept that promise.
That it's so interesting, because we all know people who go through this, and you could tell them, but unless they're ready, unless whatever it was that happened to you happens to them, they may not hear that message. They might have said, okay, walked out the door, shut the door, and went in a different direction. You made a choice. And I just, I say that because for the listeners who may know somebody or maybe dealing with that, I think it's just important, is that it has to be a choice, and you have to do it for you. It can't be, you did that for you. Even though he said it, you made the choice.
Yeah. And I always talk to people, you're into your intellect, you can promise all kinds of things, but something's going to hit your heart. And I just said, okay. And something hit my heart. I had no idea why. I didn't even know drugs and alcohol had anything to do with my problem or why my life wasn't working. And I just had to show up and be in the moment. And if anybody's going through this or someone they know, just think about, what do you want your yes to be in life? And you may not know it, but it could be, what don't I want in my life? Is that I was sick and tired of being sick and tired, and I didn't even know what it was. And I had to get help for me.
I have the saying, when your why becomes greater than your how. Sometimes you think to yourself, how am I going to make it happen? It's when your why is greater.
Yes, when you know your why, your yes, and don't worry about the how, like you said, it will recalibrate. I'm not trying to get woo-woo on you, but I think the universe, your higher self, hears it. It means you claimed it, and it will work out. It's like whatever higher power, whatever you have, a power greater than yourself, will build the wings on its way.
100%.
But it's a day at a time. I don't think about drinking, drugging, or whatever, because I've walked through it, but I still know that I don't take it for granted.
Yeah.
It can happen to anybody.
Absolutely. Without a doubt. And now when you said 26 years, you were the CEO, was that during a time when you were still in that space, or was that after?
No, I had about 4 years sobriety. Well, let's see, it's 1991. So 88, 89, 90, 91, almost 4 years sober. But it's funny. This is what sobriety does. I was a high school graduate. I didn't even get my last report card. I was afraid I wasn't going to graduate. I moved to from Wisconsin to Chicago, and I just started working. And I just started working. I didn't go to college. I wasn't a formal education person, but I'm a self-taught person. Was more experiential person. And even though now I have a master's, and I'm sure PhD in life, people said, what school did you go to? I go, SWU. They go, what school is that? And I go, Streetwise University. And I started my company. Yeah. And I started my company, and one day at a time, learn from other people. I remember getting my first business loan. They said, sorry, we can't give it to you right now. I'm in front of the banker. And I felt like Jed Clampett from the Beverly Hillbillies. I had all this paperwork, and this is what I have. It wasn't anything sophisticated. And he was like, well, this is what you need to do to get this credit line. Because as a business, I was in staffing. So we had temp to hire, and full-time staffing. So I was smart enough to know what I had to do. And he said, okay, do this, that, come to me in 6 months. I did it. came back to him in 6 months. And from a small little company I acquired for hardly anything because it was a soft business climate, I built it to a multi-million-dollar company and then sold it. But I had a lot of smarter people around me that I hired. And I remember I learned it's like hire people smarter than yourself. And then I had this one girl working with me who was a new manager, and she ended up being the president years later, right? Of Mack and Associates was the company. And she was always afraid to make a mistake. And I said, you know what? There's a saying. If you meet somebody who's never made a mistake, I'll tell you, they're working for someone who has.
Interesting.
Does that make sense? I'm going to say it again. I'm not sure if I said it right. If you meet someone who's never made a mistake, then you'll see the person they're working for who has made a mistake. So don't be afraid to make a mistake. Don't be afraid to skin your knees, because I did.
I'm right there with you. I say I have the bruises and the scrape marks, because I'm in the same boat as you. The College of Hard Knocks, I did a year and a half. And even to this day, people still say, so what school did you go to? And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm 50. Like, are we done asking that question? I mean, honestly, though, there's not enough classes in the world to give you the experience, right? So you could sit in a classroom and you can learn that route. And I love college. I agree. I wish if I could turn back time, I would have done that. But I do think that there are so many things, and my kids say it now, getting out of college or going through college, there are things that it's way different once you're in the real world, and you have to make what you learned over, in this box work in, square peg in a round hole in some cases. So I love education, totally agree with it, but there is something to be said about experiential learning.
Yeah. And I went to UCLA because I was living in California, and I went to their nighttime stuff. What is it? Extension, UCLA extension courses.
Right.
And it was so cool to walk around the campus and everything. And I was like, oh, I'm going to UCLA. I even got the discount of 10 or 15% to buy a computer because I had my ID. So if you've never been to college or something, just take an extension class and get on a campus. It's sort of, but there was shame about not having going to college too. So, but I'm walking through that, and I'm proud of myself, because this is my story. And I think it's important that people do go to school now, because it was different than when I was growing up. But get outside education too.
Absolutely. And vocational schools and all those, anything that works for you. Not everybody's one size fits all. And like I said, I did a year and a half and didn't finish. And not everybody counts that because there was no degree at the end of it. But, I think
I counted for you.
Thank you. And then going back to get certification and coaching. And I know that you're doing different things also for certifications or just different classes. And I want to talk a little bit about the work that you're doing. But before we get there, I just want to say you shifted out of, as we go through your story here, you sold your business, and then what happened?
Well, it was interesting. Right before that, it was like, I was feeling like it was a soul-sucking time. It's like I had to leave. Something was telling me the last few years, I need to change. Something is happening. I wasn't running the company on a day-to-day. I was CEO and the president. I knew as a president that it wasn't the right thing, because I'm very entrepreneurial. It needed more of an operational C-suite person, right? And so I was smart enough to have like a succession plan in place. That took a while, but then I won't get into this story, but I just knew. And I knew also that my heart of hearts needed to be a change, but it wasn't time. The timing is very important. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden I got an offer to pay, to sell my company. And I was ready. I said, if you have the money, I'm ready to sell. Got an evaluation, and guess who bought the company? The girl who started at 23 years old. She worked with me for 22 or 23 years at the time. She grew up in the ranks, and she could do it. She had a good work ethic. I got my CPA firm to do an evaluation. The number looked good. I was shocked. I'm a little high school graduate, who almost didn't pass. And And we worked out a deal and lawyers and all that. And it was like, I had to be a big girl through it all and through the negotiations. And I have to tell you, anybody who's into this, I know we're talking about a lot of things. The attorney said to me while we were negotiating and all that, she goes, Charlene, this is one of the smoothest transactions I've ever had. He goes, and I want to tell you why I think it is. And I said, why? And he said, because Charlene, when you talk, you say we and not I. So I always said at the very beginning of owning the company that the company is not me. It's not the four walls. There's a higher purpose to this company. And I kept with that we. All our decisions at an executive level was made on what's for the highest good of the company. And I knew her buying it was for her highest good, its highest good, and for mine. So it was just perfect. I wish I could have left years before, but it has, trust the timing, that even if you think nothing's happening, something's happening more than meets the eye. And so to answer your question, going forward, I decided, because I was always so lean forward, let's go, driver, let's make it happen, decide. And I decided I was going to lean back. I'm leaning back right now and be in the allowing. I said, I'll know. And I've always been in the human potential movement. And like Tony Robb, all this stuff. I've studied so much and experienced. And so I was talking to someone, I was looking into being a death doula, because I was always interested in people transitioning out of the world, like people dying. What happens, especially because of my parents.
I was going to say, do you think that was because of what happened at such a young age with your dad?
Yeah. And my mom died when I was 29, right before I got sober, right? So I always wondered, what is that about? And then you hear about people working in hospice or being with someone at the end of life. Something about that appealed to me. So I looked into that. And Marlene, my sister, referred me to this guy, Jay Westbrook, and he was a hospice nurse. And he's also a grief recovery specialist. So I talked to him for like an hour. He said, Charlene, after talking to you, he goes, you see, being a hospice or being, doing what you're thinking of doing, it's very isolating. He goes, I don't see you so isolated. He goes, I'm a grief recovery specialist. And we help people get from unresolved to resolved, incomplete to complete, and to learn about the recovery part of grief. There's therapists, there's grief counselors, there's group support. This is all supporting. But what grief recovery to me means is that there's a recovery part. My podcast, if you ever look into it, has me with 2 peace signs and with a smile, right? Mm-hmm. And I remember doing the cover of the podcast, and I sent it to some people, some relatives and friends. I said, what do you think of the cover? My brother-in-law, Paul, goes, you're showing too much teeth for grief.
Oh my goodness. What a slogan. Too much teeth for grief.
Yeah, too much teeth. You're dealing with grief. I go, no, I want people to see what the after effects are, right? Mm-hmm. Inside your very being. And so anyways, I decided to keep it. And that's how it all started. And I forgot your question again.
You know what? Now I'm trying to see if I remember my question. That's too funny.
How I got into it. Oh, and I decided to do it. So he said, Charlene, you can get certified, hang your shingle, and you could start working. I was like, great. I didn't have to have a degree. I had to have the heart, and I had to become a heart with ears. And I had to learn what grief is. Grief is sudden changes in our lives. Grief is a natural reaction to loss. And what I realized is, for myself, I was taught how to get, how to make money, how to get a job, how to make relationships, how to get this, how to get that. I didn't know how to lose.
Yeah. That's so good.
Yeah. And there's like 40 plus reasons why you could grieve. And during COVID, NBC put an article out or something like that. It was online. And all of a sudden it said the third pandemic will be grief. And grief is a very sacred Sage, meaning in love space. It's in your heart. And me as a grief recovery specialist, I'm an advanced grief recovery specialist that uses a grief recovery methodology. It's called the grief recovery method. And it's evidence-based program that's thousands of people around the world have done. And it's evidence-based, how people get to the other side of grief. And grief, I did the work on my dad and my mom. How many years later? Decades later. And I didn't realize the filters of grief I was going through. I was a woman who wanted to be married and have a love and a relationship that will stand the test of time. I was married. I'm just giving you one example. And I had multitude of relationships, married for 1 year, been with the person 3.5 years, right? I'm wondering, scratching my head, like, how come, what is baffling is why I feel, or what's happening is like, I'm not having a love that stands the test of time. And what I realized through the grief recovery method is I was afraid to get too close, because I remember when I was a kid, one of my biggest fears was losing a family member, especially my parents. And it came true.
Yeah.
And I was afraid to love deeper. I remember just even avoiding getting deep. I remember going home after my father died, maybe a year, 6 months later, and I didn't want to go home. I was like, why don't I want to go home? I don't think I wanted to get close. It may look like I can only have the capacities for so much because of this filter of grief. I was afraid to lose, afraid to get deeper.
Right.
Afraid to get vulnerable. And there's always family of origin stuff. There's all kinds of things that go with it. And then I went to look into this guy who did this groundbreaking in relationships attachment theory. So I did this kind of work too. And he said, Charlene, I read his book, called him. I said, this is great. He goes, Charlene, there are certain rights in a relationship. One of the rights is that you have the right to be separate in a relationship, and you have a right to belong and be in a relationship. She goes, Charlene, you have separate down path. You don't know how to be in a we or belong. And that was everything. And so I did that work. I did the grief recovery work method. I did my shoulda, coulda, wouldas, my forgives, my apologies, my talking about significant events, closure, goodbyes. And then afterwards I was free. Well, now I'm engaged.
Okay.
And I am so different in this relationship. It's forever changed me. And
are you a we now? You're a we now?
Absolutely. And I attracted a man who knows how to be in a we. Wow, and it makes all the difference. It's so weird. You never know. So anyway, and when I say in grief, it's like, tell people who you can know so much about yourself, talk to the cows come home. While grief support groups are good, therapy or whatever, or grief counselors, remember, discovery is not recovery. We can discover all kinds of things. I'm been in a program there, you meet a lot of people. Some have awesome recovery. They're healthy, unbelievable. You have people in there from Park Avenue to Park Bench to Park Avenue, Oscar winners, music people, especially when you're in LA, and living life so beautiful. But you can talk about your story all day long, which people do, but you got to do the work. You got to do the steps, or you got to find some other way. If alcohol and drugs isn't part of yours, other ways for that. And also other things like relationship issues, all kinds of things. And you have to do the work.
I think it's important to explain to people what the difference is between a grief counselor and the method that you use and that you work on, so that they understand what the difference is and can find you.
Well, mine is an educational approach. There is more therapeutic or counseling. And I'm sure they tell them to do things, but to me, it doesn't quite get to the crux of things. Okay. It's like in grief recovery method, it's a methodology. I take either an individual or a group and go through for one-on-ones. It's 7-week program. We get together for 1 hour And then in between, you have reading to do. And this, I was going to bring the book, but it's called the Grief Recovery Method Handbook. And then for groups, we do it for 8 weeks. And you go through this methodology from myths to a line of, your life, significant events and all that kind of stuff. And it takes someone to guide you through it, to get through it. And then I can't get into what I do, but you go through that and I help facilitate you. And there's some therapeutic aspects to it, but there's a completion to it. You can go to counseling forever and all that. And if you feel you need to, you do. But if you want the kind of results, at least I was looking for a psychic change, for things like I think about, like 30 years later, I remember with my mother, there was an incident that I never forgot. Why did it keep coming up in my consciousness? Or something, I didn't show up to my mother for a dinner right before she died. She died in her sleep. Both parents died instantly. So, but I got to do this. I feel so complete now. And that's because I do the work. And this is not hard labor. This is heart labor.
I like that. I like that. It is heart labor, and it's true. And we talked about me losing my dad, and I, we all do things in grief differently, right? And going through, for me, it was about creating an organization in his, that was inspired by him, actually, and he didn't even know it. And I think we all work through these things, uniquely different, but it is, sometimes it's a work in progress. And what I love about what you're saying is that there's a completion. And myself being a coach, I say that too. I say, when my clients no longer need me, they may come back, in a little bit, because something else comes up in their life or something triggers something. But when they no longer are in that space and have grown, it's more of a celebration that they've moved on than it is, oh my gosh, I've lost a client. It's never about that. And with therapy, I was in for years myself, is that you're right. You can keep going back to it and talking about the same thing over and over again. We need to move forward, because we can't go backwards, in time. So I love what you said about there being a completion. I think that is, just very important for people to hear, because grief is a tough space to be in to begin with. And you don't want to talk about, not necessarily want to talk about it for 10 years. And I know people that, I'm sure you've seen, that really get stuck in the sludge of it.
In the story and their identity. And what's great that you understand as a coach yourself, it's, you have your clients. There's some that are very motivated into their yes and their big why. And some I remember one therapist told me, who really helped me. I was thinking about ending the relationship, I feel like it's time. And she said it at the same time. She goes, I'm becoming an expensive girlfriend.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I love that you said that, because I have done that. I have said, we're 6 times now having the same conversation, and I give homework, just like you were talking about, in between, but that wasn't getting done. So they weren't ready for some people, just not ready to be coached or be in the method that you're utilizing. They're just not ready to put in the time and the work. And that's what it is. And I don't say work is a negative. I say it as a positive, because you're moving forward, you're pushing through. And I'm so happy that there are people like yourself out there that can help. Grief can be debilitating. I unfortunately have a couple of friends who have lost family members recently, and it's really hard to see and hard to watch. So,
heartbreaking.
It is. It really, truly, truly is. Pam 10 is a leader in IT enterprise solutions and staffing. They are driven to transform their clients' business performances. They do this every day by providing their clients with the best services and products. Products like BizLego, an online community platform, and Colear, a unique learning management system. They also transform the lives of women and children through their associated nonprofits, SheTech, which supports women in and joining the technology field, and Softkin, support organization for kids in need. Pam 10, technology for social good. Go to pam10.com for more information. But then you decided from there, the podcast came about, right? So what made you decide to launch the podcast?
It's interesting. I didn't even know what a podcast was. I heard about it, but didn't understand it. But I joined a mastermind group called Fire and Soul. And we had, before I got into this mastermind group, we did something live, how to Facebook Live weekend, where they taught us how to be live on social media to help promote our business and, learn about social media. I forgot what it's called. It was right before COVID. So with this Fire and Soul Master class, or whatever you call it, she was just started this podcast accelerator program. And she says, we're going to throw that in. So it was the first one they had. Now it's grown so much. So I was like, okay, I'll try whatever that is. And I committed to it. I did not know how hard it was going to be. And plus I had to start it then COVID hit. So I couldn't have anybody come in my house to help me with the technology, the intros, the outros, the music and wording. And I was 2:00 in the morning going, and I'm not that technical. And I'm like, oh my God. And I remember in the program when I first got sober, they're like, one of the things, first things first. And that's life wisdom anyway. First things first. First things first. So I kept telling it, the next right thing, the next right thing. So anyways, all of a sudden I was so scared through it all. That's why that saying, once a day, do something that scares you. That's what I was in total fear. But yet it's like, I called people for support and all that kind of stuff. And we had like a group where we can do messages and stuff, but I needed someone right near me. At least I thought. And then the podcast came. I absolutely knew Grief Recovery Now. That's where the name came in. And I go by intuition. You do too. It's like, just be quiet, make space for the messages. I believe God, higher power and all that for me, is infinite intelligence that works through me, in me, and as me. And I have to make space for that message where the revelations comes in through meditation or breath work, whatever you do. Thank God meditation and all that kind of stuff is out. It's because you give it space. Even things are hard, but that why or the yes. I just didn't even hardly know my why on the podcast. I just knew, hey, I got this for free for 6, let me do it. My goal orientation. I just knew. But since I've been doing it, I didn't now listen here. I remember taking acting classes when I first got sober in my early 30s. And I go, I'm going to take some acting classes. And I took it and I got into a cool class. And they said, well, Char, you always seem to be it's hard for you to get into, if you have to be sad or whatever. And I didn't like not being myself. And at the end of the class, I said, you know what? During that time, it was Kathy Lee Gifford and Regis Philbin, right?
Yes.
I go, I'm more of a Kathy Lee Gifford. Decades later, right? Here I am hosting my own podcast. And I didn't grab onto that. I'm like, I'm a host of my own podcast. I get my guests. I got you, which is great. And going through your Changemakers forum that you do and the people I met, I'm like, oh my God, I manifested it somehow. I didn't hang on tight to that idea, but I knew, God, that would have been really nice if I could do that. Here I am, 64 years old, feeling like I'm just beginning in life. And here I go. That's how I did it. And I just showed up for it, even though my head was like, what is this? Something in my heart that's unspoken that just pulled me. You're either pushed by pain or pulled by a vision. And while it was painful doing it, I was pushed by some kind of vision bigger than myself. And then it made sense. And I love it. And I get to talk to you today too. I would never have met you.
I know, exactly. I'm so grateful. And again, for me, it's all about the connections, right? So, and I mean that about, I've connected through the podcasting with the most incredible, don't you feel that way? It's like people I would have never in a million years. And I, like you, stayed up till 2, 3 in the morning because I had nobody here to help me with all of the technology. So I know exactly the pain that you, but on the other end, we did it. You know what I mean? And I feel like it's a celebration. We did it. And you keep bringing up that you're 64. And I swear when I look at you, I'm like, oh my gosh, I want to look at like you at 64. Incredible. You look amazing. And you sound so young. You have this heart and energy and zest for life. that I think people, don't understand the importance of having, because we only have one of it, one life, that we're here right now. And I think it's just so great that you share that with others and talk about the pull. What did you say? I wish I could repeat it. It either pulls you, say that again.
You're either pushed by pain or pulled by a vision. And I learned that through Reverend Michael Beckwith from the Agape International Spiritual Center. He's been on Oprah and he was in The Secret and all that kind of stuff. But those are the things, get those glimmers. I believe in little, intuitive shots that, I call it, what do you call that? Like little awakenings. Like all of a sudden you'll say something. I go, oh my God, I'm going to write this down. Write down things that resonate with you, that you can use in your verbiage and you can use in your life. And it's just like you're either pushed by pain or pulled by a vision. I'm like, oh, wow. Or even, discovery is not recovery. Take those little, sometimes at my mind, when I first got sober, I don't know why I'm talking about sobriety so much, but when I first got sober, it was like those little things, one day at a time. And then I added one moment at a time, one nanosecond at a time. We're living life every day.
Right. That's right.
And
I think that,
sometimes.
It is. And, you talk about, why am I talking about being sober? Sometimes, when I think about that, and this happens to me all the time with the podcast, I don't know if it happens with you as well, is that I wonder sometimes why, we head down a certain road that we might not have thought of. But then I think about the fact that there may be somebody in the audience who down the road is going to be listening to this and needs to hear it. And that's why we were pulled in that direction. We just may never know who that is or why it happened. So I appreciate you kind of going forward with it, because I know it's not always an easy topic to talk about, but it's definitely something that others are experiencing and can learn from. And so thank you for being so open about it. I do really appreciate that.
You are so welcome. And I just thought about, I'm doing, besides grief recovery, I'm doing this positive intelligence work.
Yes, let's talk about that.
And it is just blowing my mind. To me, it's like the holy grail of what I'm going to be getting into in life. And you think about yoga, meditation, and some things that were so underground for so long, right? Now they're in the forefront. Everybody, so many people are doing yoga, they're doing meditation. I don't care who you are, President of the United States to the most conservative people, and the most liberal and everything in between. They're practicing this, whether you're religious or spiritual, there's some sense that this is coming up. I believe our consciousness is rising. It may not look like it because of all the polarity, but the thing I'm getting into now, it's called mental fitness. And I'm doing and I believe this is the next frontier. And this is not just fitness, like you have to build your muscles of mental fitness, but this is working with the neural pathways. Right. Because the more we get negative, the more we judge, the more we avoid, the more we're the pleaser, the more we're the hyperachiever, the more that, we're the stickler. It gets ingrained in us. It's just like neural pathways going to the left, right? What we're doing with mental fitness is changing the neural pathways to go to the right. I'm trying to make it as simple as possible because I need simple approaches. So this is the mental fitness. So it's a daily practice and it's not hard. It's just so great. So we deal with the saboteurs. What's sabotaging your life? What are we unconscious about? Like the judger, can you judge yourself? You judge others, you judge circumstances and situation experiences. And it could stop your life. And the more you judge, you let your judger take control, it affects your life all over. The relationships, the work, and we're all in relationship. I don't care if you're work or personal or whatever. Right. And then you can be some of the other saboteurs are avoider, pleaser. I'm one of avoider. Some things, if it's too hard, I don't want to deal with paperwork. Well, I have paperwork this high. If I do that on a day-to-day level, it's going to affect me. I'm not paying my taxes. I'm not doing this. I'm not doing that because I'm just too overwhelmed that I can't be on my big yes because I got too much all over the place, right? And then when you have the hyperachiever, and I had a hyperachiever too, what a combo, right? So I can be doing work, wanting to get done, make the sale back in the day, and not have my heart in it. What's in conflict? People read you. They know if you're not authentic.
Right.
right? Or you're hyper vigilant, or you're a stickler. Everything you do is like you're sticklering. This one woman said about her kids since she started doing this the positive intelligence stuff. She goes, my kid walked in the room and started talking to me. Because I guess he was afraid to talk to her because every time, hey, you're doing this wrong, you're doing that wrong. Here, move this. You didn't do the dishes right, blah, blah, blah. So there's so much to talk about. I mean, we can't go through the podcast. And then you get into your sage. The thing you want to do is get into your sage. And that is the love. That is the heart center. And then the mind gym and the heart working together in harmony, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And so you get into your sage. And the first part of the sage is you're either in acceptance or you're in innovation.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's other things that go with the sage that I'm not going to get into, but you just operate on a different level. And you recalibrate, and you show up every day. We're always going to have our judge. Even the guy who started it, Sir Zad, he goes, he came from so much abuse and all that. It was very sad. We had to look at baby pictures, young child pictures. And you had to come and like, this is the sage. They were a sage, the beauty of who they are, who they still are today. So all these people did their pictures, and Shazad had one where he was just looked miserable. Well, he had a very tough childhood. Somebody also got Putin picture, 2 childhood pictures of Putin.
Wow.
I never saw such a sad child in my life. Sad or whatever he was.
Believe it.
Felt it. And so while I don't condone anybody like Putin or whatever, we all had our sage at the beginning. So let's get back to it. And if I'm mad at someone, I want to you do this PQ work, and I won't get into that, but it's so cool. And
you're making me all excited about it. I'm like,
I know, I'm going to do, I'll tell you about it after we talk, but I'm in training right now, but this is going to be the next frontier. And that's going to do with grief too. The filters we walk through with grief, in life, in our grief, and how do we get into recovery? And then even more than recovery, how do we get into the thriving and the, don't we want to live life large? No matter, even if you just want to live with your beloved and have your dogs and just enjoy life, whether you like to watch TV every night or travel the world, whatever it is, or else we want our lives to be bigger, like the podcast. I think one of the questions you sent me that may be asked is what have you got out of the podcast, or what I wanted to be worldwide, international. And now with technology, we can be worldwide. So I look at all the countries that listen to my podcast. I was like, even if there's 2 people in Dublin or New Zealand, I'm like, yay.
I say the same thing. Listen, I look at the stats and I say, oh my gosh, 36 or 40. I think I'm at 42 countries. I don't care if one person in one of those, it was one in each one of those 42 countries, people would have never heard any of our voices, would have never heard any of what we taught. But also, when I listen to your podcast or other podcasts, I'm doing the same thing. I'm taking away those nuggets, that information. And the reason I'm spending the time is because of the fact that there's something to be learned. And yes, it is. I wanted to know what you were hoping people would gain from listening to your podcast.
One is that they're not alone. That there are ways. It's just not the grief recovery method, even though you could do the grief recovery method and use all kinds of other stuff. But if you don't, there's, through writing, I get artists, people who write. I have a woman who lost a child and what she's doing, a husband, and she remarried, and he supports her in talking about being a widow, and everybody is unique. You've lost your dad. I lost my dad, but we have different ways of walking through the grief and the experiences, our coulda, shoulda, wouldas, our forgives and apologies. That's why I say, I never tell people grief, I know what you're going through. I don't. And I want to teach people.
So important. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but people say it all the time, and it's not true.
Yeah. And the myths of grief, what we grew up with, how it says, one of the founders, their father died, and the mother was crying in another room, and the son was grieving too. He was about to go in there to talk to her. And one of the uncles go, let her be alone. And that imprinted with him. That stayed with him. And so that was his myth. And we need people. Well, we need alone time if we need it or want it. Just don't go down a rabbit hole. We need each other to share. And we need each other to be a heart with ears with each other.
Yes, a heart with ears. That's another thing I've written down. I like that as well. And you're right. Write down the things you hear. Those gems of information from wherever you are, whether it's listening to a podcast or because I know for myself, I don't remember if I don't write it down. So it's important. It's terrible. What type of guests do you like to have on your podcast?
I like guests who see what happened, whether they were in trauma, PTSD, or extreme grief, or even some kind of loss, like their identity.
Right.
And how do they, and people, how are they thriving in the world? And how they didn't thrive in the world, and what they went through to get it. I see my guests, the guests I look for who are a message out there, and how you can get to the other side. Portion of my podcast is what was it like, what happened, and what it's like today. So you see where they came from, when it happened, even before it happened. And it's a little story. I learn from stories. And I'm right there with you. Like, oh, really? I'm so curious. So I'm looking for people who want to share their experience, strength, and hope. And that comes from, my recovery work that I've done. And people who are motivated to even live lives beyond their wildest dreams and share with others. People of service. Like, oh, yeah, a couple people from your forum. I love it. And what I love about you is that you're such a sharer. And I'm the same way. My friends are your friends, whatever. If you become friends with each other, great, or business, great. But when I told you that I got in touch with Scott, who I'm interviewing tomorrow, he's on the podcast I'm recording, and Michael, you were like, yay. And I was like, oh, you don't covet your relationships.
Yeah.
You share. And I just love it. And those are the people I want to be around.
Me too, because a lot of people are like, no, they're mine. These are incredible change makers that I put out. They came on my podcast. I put them out, and I want more people to put them out because their stories people won't always only just listen through my podcast. They may be connected to you. Why should their stories go, just through one venue? They need to be heard throughout. And in order to do that, we need to share. And I think that's very, very important. It's all about the messages for sure. Yeah. There was a question that I was going to ask you, but now I totally it was from something you said before. I'm telling you, the brain sometimes. I do want to ask you though too, is that if there was something that you could share with us, a success story, has anybody contacted you from the podcast saying, oh my gosh, that was so incredible what I heard? I know it's only been 2 years, so sometimes it takes a little time for that, but have you ever received an email or anything from anyone that's really been like, wow, that really hit me?
Well, I'll have to tell you, someone I know that we didn't hang out or anything. She called me. She says, I want to do your work. She goes, I've listened to every single of your podcasts, and I just got off the beach and I listened to the last one, the most current one. And she was going through a very difficult time through losses, and she lost her beloved, and a lot of regrets and the coulda, shoulda, wouldas and all that. And it was such an honor to have witnessed her going through the grief recovery method. And that's helped me, like, oh my God. And that I think it helped her. She was in a lot of pain, but she was motivated. The people I want to work with are motivated. They don't know what's going on, but they know something's going on that's stopping her. And I'm trying to think if there's anyone else that I had a friend. No, I have one. Someone that I worked with. She did the method. She hated her mother. Hated her mother. After she did the method, a little while later, not too long later, just little things, right? All of a sudden she had moved. And so she was unpacking a box. There was a framed picture of her mother. She put it on the mantle in her home. And she goes, I don't know what the hell just happened. I mean, she just was like, hated her mother. So something shifted. It could be as little, it does seems little, but that was everything.
Yeah. I learned a new word. It's not new, but it's a word that now I'm really engaged with. And it's the word surrender. And it's not like surrender in the bad, negative way. It's surrender in the letting go way, so that you can connect, so that you can get rid of, like you said, those lenses that kind of wash over us, and just kind of surrender into them. And so that's kind of a new word that I've been playing with. And I feel like when you said that, I just felt like that word came up in that she just kind of surrendered that pain and just put up that picture and connected with that person. I don't know that that's her story,
She
but
surrendered right before, or she just something recalibrated from the work. You don't have to predict, yeah, I want all this stuff to happen, because sometimes there's more. Sometimes I don't know my heart of hearts until it's manifested. Like, oh my God. With her, I don't know if she was looking to love her mother.
right.
But to put a mantle up there, I don't know, but I know what you mean. It's like surrender. That's a part of acceptance too.
Oh, absolutely. Without a
Yeah.
doubt.
So what was it with you? I'd love to learn on this grief journey or your journey. What was that? What did you have to surrender? Enough about me.
Now this is your podcast. Trying to control a lot of things, right? So you know what I mean? And trying to always know the right answer, right? And judging and also surrendering of the judgment of myself, right? That's a big thing for me, because I'm always, we sometimes can be our worst critics, right? So there were a lot of things to surrender. There was a list. and that's something. And it's funny because my dad was all into not yoga, but meditation for years and years and years. And I looked at him as that was frou-frou. And he tried so many times, because I was so ADHD, to try to get me into doing that. That'll just calm your mind. And I was like, no way. He's gone now. And now I talk to people like you, and I do meditation. And it's almost as if I wish he could, like you said, your mom passed before she saw you sober. I wish he could see the journey now, because it's switched into all the things that he talked about that I wouldn't do before. So I think it's, like you said, it's just kind of incredible how things happen. The universe, got whatever it is that people believe in, there's a pull. And if you accept it and you surrender to it, you can be open to it. So those are just something that came to me.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. And sometimes I remember one time I had a bad back and I just had this warm thing. It was like 3 or 4 days and I knew I was getting better. I had a friend call me and go, Charlene, you want to go for dinner and a walk? In my head, it said, no, but something, I don't know what it was in my heart or what. I go, okay, yes. And I met her. I was so happy I went out. Sometimes you have to do the contrary action too.
Oh, that has happened. Yeah. It's when the head and the heart, right? They have a little bit of an argument sometimes, but the heart is where it really, I do believe, where a lot of it is, for sure. I can talk to you for hours.
I know.
What were you going to say?
I believe I have to do my niche. I've been figuring out what is my niche or niche, whatever you call it, niche in what I'm doing next with the positive intelligence, along with the grief work. I think I see myself working with people who are motivated and they're in reinvention.
I love that.
That's happening now. The great resignation going on in work. I don't care if you're C-level, meaning, you have people all over the country. C-level is like CEO, CFO,
COO. Yeah,
all the COO and all that. And, high-level executives and everybody. You don't have to be an executive, but people are changing. Every individual. It's like there is a reinvention going on. And I don't want people to do it alone. It's no fun.
it isn't. It is. I'm with you, right? The whole Changemakers premise, everything I'm doing and working with Changemakers. And so, yeah, we're on similar journeys, and that's why we met. So I totally believe no accidents there. But I do want to ask you what I ask every podcast guest, which is, what is the footprint that you are creating right now that you want to leave behind?
I want to be known as a welcoming spirit. Come as you are. I want to my footprint is like I could cry right now. I always tell people my podcast is a come as you are podcast, exactly where you are. And I used to always go to visits with clients, corporate clients. I go, what's your snapshot? I want people to know, okay, what's your snapshot today? You can't go forward until you know your snapshot. What's your picture today? Let's get down to it. Where are you today? Because if you don't know if your saboteurs, you don't know what's going on in your grief space, you don't know these things, you'll never be able to go forward. And once you do that, have that level of belief, like came to believe, and also know where you are today. Like, we need to be awake. I would love to have an awake world. So that's my imprint. And have a welcoming world to each other. That we're perfect just as we are today. And we're getting even better.
That's right. That's right. Oh, that's a beautiful footprint. Thank you for sharing that. You're right. People go through life. I call it on cruise control, right? You're just kind of just going along, and being awake and being present. Those are things that are very, very important, because life goes by so quickly. We don't think it does, but all of a sudden I'm 50, you're 64, and we're like, where'd it go? Right? Like, oh my God.
And there's different grief, right? Where I was at 30 is so different than I was now. I mean, I went someplace 2 years ago, I was in the summer. I saw these young girls walking down this, tourist area, and they looked like they didn't have a care in the world. Not that they didn't, but
I know what you mean.
I was like, oh, I was grieving my youth. I'm like, I'm not going to be there. I'm not where they are, where I can have, I mean, I love where I am, but I would like to know what I know, and to be back there so I can have a lot more time with my loved one, my fiance and family. And does this make sense to you?
Oh my God. Yeah. My last question used to be in 2021 was, if you knew then what you know now. I mean, how much more I could have done knowing what I know now back then, right? It's just, how much more could I have accomplished? How much more happiness could I have had, because I wouldn't have been on that cruise control or done this or that. Not the should haves, not the could haves, but the knowledge. If we could have had that knowledge and experience and had our youth at the same time, how incredible that would be.
Yeah, absolutely. And the listeners there, because I know you have a really good bunch of anybody who's attracted to your podcast is already in that change maker world or want to be. It's like, reach out. Like, what you're doing is just awesome. And if you feel like you need a little help, call me. Get in my Grief Recovery Now group. It's a private group on Facebook. I'll let you in. Just let me know. I don't let people in. I really check them out to make sure that they're not spammers and all that kind of stuff. But go Grief Recovery Now podcast with Charlene Gorzela. I get on that. Please leave a, rate and review and whatever. I want to spread the word on grief and educate people, but, reach out, even if you're under the covers at home.
Absolutely. We are here for you.
Yeah.
And we all do different things. And we all, the one thing I love is that people connect with different people. So it doesn't matter if you're doing the same thing. You have to go to who you connect best with. That's the most important thing.
Mm-hmm. And look at people, even though if you're in your judger space and you judge externally, do me a favor. I think it's so important, because I have family members who judge, not my, nobody close. I'm not naming anybody, if anybody, my family is, but sometimes people will judge people, but look at them as children, try to picture them as a child. Yeah. And how beautiful they were. They still are that, even if you don't like what they do. I'm not saying let them roll over you or whatever, but look at each other as like, we're all in this together, even if you don't believe what their beliefs are. I was with somebody who was like the opposite end of politically than me. And we had so much fun together. And he had something on his neck, or it was like a medallion. I knew who he was, but I was like, you know what? We're just all going to have fun together and enjoy life. And when you don't talk politics or religion, my parents used to say, don't talk politics, religion, and how much money you make. Mm-hmm. And life will be fine. And I didn't know how true those words were.
Oh, they are very true. Especially in the climate we're in. They're very, very true, without a doubt.
Right.
But I want to thank you, Charlene, for just, sharing your heart, your light, your story with us today. Is there anything else before we end that you wanted to share?
No, one thing I want to do, I just want to tell you how much I appreciate you. And I love that you're in my life, and anyone who's listening to you. You have so much heart. And I think that's why I was so attracted to what you're doing. And that for me, I hold myself in high esteem today. There's moments when I don't. But I want to say, Serzad, who started the Positive Intelligence, he started his TED Talk. He goes, I just want to tell you, I am awesome. People are like, what? He goes, but I also want you to know that you are awesome.
I love that. I'm going to go listen to his TED Talk. That is awesome.
And he has one from Stanford University too. He does. And he's a guy, like I'm like this like little, almost a high school dropout, right? But not really at that time. But I just see it's like we're all the same. We're all wants, have the needs and wants as each other. And so why don't we come from love in everything we do and really know ourselves? It's up to us to know who we are. Know thyself.
Right. One of my podcast guests, and I'll just say this as the last thing, is that she said, your attitude, it's not your aptitude, it's your attitude that determines your altitude. So no matter what degree, no matter what not degree, it doesn't matter. It's everything related to your attitude. And I think that's why you've been so successful. You have just this great attitude. You've overcome some amazing things that you had to deal with, that you've shared. And I just want to thank you. And I'm so grateful to know you. And now we get to be on this journey together, which is so cool.
That's right. Thank you. I appreciate you.
I appreciate you too. So I'm going to say what I always say. I'm going to thank Charlene Gorzela for being a part of the podcast today and sharing her heart. And today is the day. You cannot go back to yesterday, and you do not yet own tomorrow. So what steps, small or large, are you going to take today to get yourself closer to your goal? Have a great week, everyone. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.